Hello, and welcome back to Miss Bell's classroom. Today in class we're going to be talking about the Industrial Revolution. So we'll be kind of talking about what it was, what it meant for society, and how it changed society, and some of the new inventions that took place during the Industrial Revolution. So the Industrial Revolution, what was it? It was just a change in manufacturing methods from the domestic system to the factory system. So the development of new sources of power, so steam, electricity, and oil were very big deals, where it was a very big deal. So steam, electricity, and oil, all three of those things were big proponents of the Industrial Revolution and kind of shaped the revolution, and we'll talk a little bit more about that though. So kind of a brief overview, we're going to talk about the Industrial Revolution and the creation of new classes, and then kind of the causes of the Industrial Revolution today. So energy, coal, and steam started to replace wind, water, human and animal labor. So organization, factories over cottage industries started happening. Rural agricultural declines, so urban manufacturing increased. And transportation, trains, automobiles replaced animals and watercraft. So kind of getting into those, all of these kind of helped with that. So there were during the Industrial Revolution, there was a kind of the creation of new social classes. So the industrial middle class, there was a shift in political power, and there was inspiration for new political systems, especially Marxism. So some of the causes of the Industrial Revolution were the Renaissance, so humanism, people seeking kind of material comforts, and commercial revolution, so caused by colonialism and new markets, so people wanted more things and to buy more things. So the Industrial Revolution started in England, and we're going to talk a little bit why did it start in England. So there were kind of 5 main reasons that it started in England. So the first main reason that it started in England were the markets. So England had many overseas colonies or markets. So it was easier to kind of make products, have people working with that. The second reason was the population. So there were many skilled workers, there were wealthy entrepreneurs, and a vast number of workers again. So the population helped with people who wanted to invest in companies, but they also had a lot of skilled labor, they had a lot of skilled workers, and they were able to kind of do more with that. So the third reason was the agricultural changes in England. Oops. So what that meant was there were enclosure acts, so tenant farmers were forced off the farms and moved to different areas to find work in factories. So they kind of had to start working in factories because they weren't allowed to have those farms. They were forced away. And 4, natural resources. So natural resources, they had coal, iron, good harbors, canals. Colonies had raw materials like lumber and cotton. And 5, the 5th reason, is the government. So the government was stable and it was a unified country. Parliament, they had limited monarchy, and there were fair taxes and a solid banking system as well. So those are kind of some of the main reasons why the Industrial Revolution began in England. So, like I said earlier, there were new sources of power. So they had steam, which allowed them to have steamships, paddle boats, steam locomotives. Electricity allowed for the light bulb, petroleum, oil for automobiles. So just increasing the efficiency with, their sources of power. They weren't having to, have human and animal labor. They were able to replace their energy sources. James Watt's steam engine was a condenser, and it really increased efficiency. Also, the water frame was powering the spinning, which was used for horses, and the water wheel, so that kind of helped increase efficiency as well. The impact of the railroads, so in 1836, they were using horses and wheel in a wagon. And so, for example, the journey from London to Edinburgh was around 43 hours. But when they got the railroad, it became around 12 and a half hours. Same thing. So from London to Liverpool, it was 24 hours with the horse and buggy. And with the railroad, it became 6.5. So it really decreased the amount of time and, helped them get more supplies to other areas. Also, agriculture changes were huge. So changes in agriculture was a change from kind of the primitive feudal farming methods to more modern machine methods. So it's really labor-saving machinery, like plows, tractors, seed drills. There were a lot of scientific advances, so crop rotation, breeding, agricultural, which led to, an increased agricultural production. Less farmers moved from cities, less farmers moved to cities. Farm work became much easier, and farming became a really big business. So it was very easy for, them to make money and grow things now that they had all these tools. The factory system was very big in the Industrial Revolution. So it was kind of a division of labor. The worker doesn't make the whole product, performs one operation. So some of the advantages of this were it was much more efficient, but a disadvantage is that it can get very boring and tedious. They had a very speedy output of goods, and the goods are able to be lower priced because they're able to produce more. And the only thing about that, though, is that, it limits creativity of products. It's kind of standardized. If you were working in a factory, it was a rigid schedule, 12 to 14-hour day. Dangerous conditions, kind of mind-numbing monotony too, because you're doing the same thing all day for 12 to 14 hours a day. Another thing was the domestic or putting out system. So the textile industry was one of the most important industries in England, and most of the work was done at home. So that was kind of an important invention for the textile industry. Another big thing that you probably heard of today, definitely, capitalism was big with the Industrial Revolution. So what is capitalism? It's money. The Industrial Revolution created the need for vast amounts of capital to build factories, purchase machinery, purchase raw materials, and just to kind of work on. So that was a big thing, which led to new social classes. So economic factors resulted in the decline of, using those old human and animal labors. Capitalist wealth brought new statuses to families. There were new urban classes of professionals. There were blue-collar factory workers. Urban environment also created a new type of, diversions between different types of events. So you could go to sporting events. The new class evolved from guild merchants in cities, kind of began to eclipse power and status, which landed you your class. So there are some basic principles of capitalism. So private ownership is one. So private ownership. So individuals own the means of production and distribution of goods and services. So free enterprise is another part of capitalism. So what that means is anyone can enter any business. This one is profit. So bottom line of a business is to make money. Market economy is another factor. So based on supply and demand, what people want. If people want more, the price goes up. If people want less, the price goes down. And then competition. So competition will help you price your goods at a fair amount. So if people have goods that are priced less than you, they're going to go elsewhere. So competition kind of helps level out the market for the people. Another important thing that happened during the Industrial Revolution was the Transcontinental Migration. So the 19th and early 20th centuries, rapid population growth drives Europeans to the Americas. About 50 million cross the Atlantic. Britons want to avoid the urban slums, Irish to avoid the potato famines of 1840s. And the United States was just a favored destination during that time. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about the labor unions, women in the workforce, child labor, and kind of how the government responded to that. So women in the workforce, so agriculture, cottage industry work involved women, so it's kind of a natural transition. But development of men as prime breadwinners and women in the private sphere, kind of working cheap labor. So it was a little bit of a double burden. Women were expected to maintain a home as well as work in the industry. So it kind of related to child labor that was happening during this time. There was a lack of daycare facilities and women were working. So child labor was seen as a punishment. A lot of them were malnourished. If the children tried to run away. They were sent to prison. They had 14 to 16-hour workdays with very unfair low wages and extremely dangerous working conditions. So factory owners actually argued that child labor was good for the economy and helped build children's characters. The Factory Act of 1833 limited child labor and the number of hours children could work in textile mills. And also the kind of labor unions in the 1871 Trade Union Act. Parliament passed the Trade Union Act of 1871, recognizing the collective or corporate identity of trade unions and effectively legalizing them. Trade unions were thereafter allowed to organize all of their own activities. And now we're going to talk a little bit about monopolies, trusts, and cartels. So large corporations form blocks to drive out competition, which keep prices high. John D. Rockefeller controlled almost all oil drilling, processing, refining, marketing in the United States. And German Farben controlled around 90% of chemical production. So governments were often very slow to control monopolies. Another thing was the social reform. So socialism had a major impact on the 19th century reformers, reduced property requirements for male suffrage, addressed issues of medical insurance, unemployment compensation, retirement benefits, which kind of led to the trade unions to form and causing strikes to address, some of the concerns that the workers had. Another thing was the Chartists. So they wanted political and social reform. They wanted the government to adopt a people's charter, which was influenced kind of the struggle for universal voting rights. The government's response to that was they were looking into the working conditions. So the Factory Act of 1833 stopped the child labor. The Poor Law of 1834 provided kind of the indoor relief, making houses for people who couldn't afford them. And then the 1832 bill, it broadened the vote for the cities. The People's Charter was drafted in 1838 by William Levet. It was a radical campaign for the parliamentary reform of the inequalities created by the Reform Bill of 1832. So they wanted votes for all men, equal electoral districts, payment for members of parliament, annual general elections, and the secret ballot. Also, another thing that was kind of appealing to the working class was the Methodism, which was kind of thought of by John Wesley, which was an instant salvation. Karl Marx was a very well-known man then. So he was a philosopher, social scientist, historian, and revolutionarist. Karl Marx was regarded by many as the most influential economic and social thinker of the 19th century. So Karl Marx and Frederick Engels kind of thought of two major classes: capitalists, who control the means of production, and the proletariat, wage workers who sell labor. So there was an explosive nature of the capitalist system, and they argued for an overthrow of capitalists in the favor of a dictatorship of the proletariat. Sorry if I'm saying that wrong. So the socialists, the Marxists, and utopians, people as a society would operate and own the means of production, not individuals, is what they believed. Goal was a society that benefited everyone, not just the rich, well-connected few, and they tried to build perfect communities or utopias. Robert Owen was also a utopian socialist. He founded the New Lanark Mills in Scotland as a model cooperative factory. And many industrialists visited New Lanark, and a few adopted aspects of Owen's cooperative. Thomas Malthus presented the idea of population growth and how population outgrowth will outpace the food supply. War, disease, or famine could control population. Poor should have less children, and supply will then keep up with population. The utilitarians, Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, said that the goal of society is the greatest good for the greatest number, and there is a role to play for government intervention to provide some social safety nets. Also, there was a kind of some major cultural impacts. So Romanticism, they kind of glorified divine power of nature as a reaction to the Industrial Revolution. And then also the cultural impact of the visual arts. So French artist Honor Dahmer painted the poor and working classes in third-class carriage. He illustrated with great compassion of a group of people on a train journey. And then another thing, the industrialization in Russia and Japan was more of a slower start. Russia constructed huge railway networks across Siberia under Finance Minister Count Sergei Witt, and the Japanese government took initiative by hiring thousands of foreign experts, which reformed the iron industry and allowed them to open universities specializing in science and technology. So that's just kind of a little overview of the Industrial Revolution. I hope that you found this interesting, and thank you for listening. Goodbye.